far as the newest programming is, they have to get everything ready. Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namaste, Saraswati Devi Gauravani. Here we see Sasanya. Oma Gnatamaratmasya Gnatjana Samakaya Chakshuramilatam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Bhaktadamayam Tadati Svapatantikam Panchakopa Turupishta Kripa Sindhuve Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna. Welcome everyone this morning. I heard today was actually like the biggest day of the festival is today. So, I brought something today, something very special, very, very special. So make sure you stay to the end of the class. Otherwise you won't be able to take part. We're locking the doors anyway, so we're not letting anyone leave. And this is from the green faucet, right, this water. I heard this morning of lake water and drinking water. This is not from the lake, is it? It's
no.
And today we're also going to... Sure it's not from the lake? One day, many years ago, about 20 years ago, I was in Vrindavan. That time it was my wife, son and daughter. It was my daughter's first time in India. And I guess at the time, she was just about 18 years old. A little younger, maybe even 16. Anyway, it was the first experience in India, and we were in Vrindavan. It was Krishna Balaram Mandir and MVT. And she was very enthusiastic to see, anything, transcendental activities. Of course, she really liked the monkeys until, one of them came up and attacked her, and then she didn't like them so much. But we went to Radhakund one day, and, very nicely offered our respects, and took back from Radhakund, and she filled up a bottle with the drinking water bottles, and we brought it home. And of course, the water in Radhakund isn't always very clear. It's a little colory, greenish sometimes. And then by that time in India, this is in the 90s, so everyone you drink bottled water, you don't drink, at least you didn't drink from any taps or anything, you don't drink bottled water. So we were there 2 weeks together, and one night, I woke up in the middle of the night in the dark, and I was very thirsty, so I reached down and grabbed my bottle of drinking water, and I picked up the bottle of Radhakund water accidentally, and I took a drink, and I was like, so I turned on the light, and it said Radhakund on the bottle. I was like, and then everything was fine, it was okay. I was afraid at the time. Usually when you go in different waters and you make sure you don't swallow anything. It's a little scary. There's a lot of little things swimming around. You can see them right there. Anyway, today we're going to, you asked a question the other day, you wanted to hear the story about kachuris, kachuri and luglu. And I thought each day, I guess, kind of the morning class is where it gets me started in what I'm going to speak about later on in the morning. It kind of piques my mind and my interest. And rather than asking questions in class and comments in class, which will make it go longer, which makes it more difficult for everyone to make it on time here, I just do my best to keep quiet in the class. But then it makes me think about different things. So class this morning, of course, was very focused on having that intense desire, that intense feeling to become Krishna conscious. course, one of the things it made me think about was what we find, that, which we know, and she explained very well about how there are no obstacles in the path of Krishna consciousness. There's nothing material can affect a person's desire to become Krishna conscious. There are no material impediments. And sometimes that's a little hard to understand because, there can seemingly be so many impediments. But from the very beginning, Prabhupada always gives the same understanding. It is that understanding there are no material impediments. And early on, this was back in the late 60s when the movement was expanding. So you can imagine it went from just a few dozen people to then a few hundred devotees. And as everyone experiences, the more people you have, the more discussions, the more controversies, the more arguments, the more differences people have. So, and that can be seen, as she was describing, and that's what she said, even if the management can't stop you from becoming Krishna conscious. She was alluding to this so many management difficulties. So that's always there, always going on. And, the one devotee he wrote, Prabhupada, his name was Krishna Das. He was the first Krishna Das in our society, Krishna Das. And he was in Germany. So he was having disputes with his god brothers on how to do things, and how you should do things, and how I should do, what you should do, what I should do. So he wrote Prabhupada, and he called them stumbling blocks. A very nice phrase, stumbling blocks. When you're walking, sometimes you stumble due to surfaces not being uneven, blocks, stumbling blocks. So Prabhupada wrote back and said, there are no stumbling blocks in the path of devotional service. There aren't any. And he said, I kick away all your stumbling blocks. See, this is the role of the spiritual master. And then he said, explain how he kicks them away. He said, I kick them away, but you have to be prepared to follow my instructions, follow my guidelines, follow my rules. So this is the thing. And Prabhupada said that, our godbrother Bhakti Srup Damodar, he was in charge of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which Prabhupada put so much time and energy into developing the ability to scientifically prove Krishna consciousness and to all the fools and rascals who denied Krishna, to smash them. That was one of his pleasures, was to smash all these mudhas, these so-called intelligent, scientific people who were denying the very existence of God. But very, very late in Prabhupada's stay here, in just a month before he left, Maharaj, Sudamara Maharaj was visiting Prabhupada, and he was having difficulties as well with his godbrothers in pushing on, because the Bhaktivedanta Institute required a lot of funding. They didn't get donations from outside. The money was coming from ISKCON. So that makes for difficulties. When you need money, then things become difficult. But Prabhupada was very specific that he wanted his institute to be funded by the society so that he could carry on his activities and his service. So he said to Prabhupada, how do you do? He said, when there's so many problems, he said, how can you do your service? He said, it's very difficult. He said, I have so many objections, so many difficulties. And Prabhupada at this time, of course, he's in bed, lying down 24 hours. And still conducting everything. So he said to him, there are no difficulties in Krishna consciousness. Of course, this time he didn't get stumbling blocks. He said, but there are no difficulties, he said, in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service. He says, there's only service to the spiritual master. So that's what it always boils down to. You have service to your spiritual master, and whatever it requires us to do, we attempt to do it. And as we know, the result you offer to Krishna, the result isn't up to us. And no matter how expert you may feel you are, how many qualifications the person may have. Everything is up to Krishna's will, whether it's going to manifest or not manifest, according to his desire, not according to our wishes, what we want to happen, because we're so sincere in wanting to do something. But that doesn't make it a problem. It doesn't make it a difficulty. Our business is to want to serve. And that's all we have to do. Therefore, there's never any impediments. She was talking about that Mataji in the car accident. And I thought it was interesting too, because she was saying how she's saying, you know, you can all go out and do service. She said, I'm sitting here, I want to do service, but I can't do any service, but you're doing service. Of course, that was her service now. She was sitting there telling, this is what we do. We have different situations. You know, just like now, I'm not able to go out and plow fields, but when you're this age and you've been around for some years, hopefully you have something useful to say. So service can change, you know, at any time, and it goes in different directions. And that's our service. When you have children, it's obvious what your service is. Prabhupada said your children, they're your deities. Until he said, you know, 5 years old, especially with the boys, he said then, you know, you should start disciplining when they're Gurukula, which now Gurukulas are all very much based locally, which is very good, so the parents are always there to see. But until that time, he said, young child should be spoiled like anything by the parents. And they become your deity, not that you should be thinking, well, I have these children, I can't do my service, I can't do deity worship, I can't do this. That's your service. It's simple. You have to help them develop. It's the most important time of their life. Everything they're going to do the rest of their life is affected by the first 5 years of their life. How they approach everything, how they see things, how they feel about things. It all happens in the very beginning. Happens in the womb, it's already going on. So the service is always there for everyone. But as he said to Maharaj in that thing, there are no difficulties, there's just service. And as he said to Krishna Das, you know, that there are no stumbling blocks. But you have to understand what your service is, and then to execute it to the best of your ability. That's part of, you know, what she was talking about this morning as well, that hankering. Always, that's okay. We have to have that hankering. We don't become complacent in devotional service. It's always increasing. Always want to do more. We always want to better ourselves for Krishna, to serve Him. You know, Prabhupada, they said, you know, he slept just a few hours at night. So one evening in Vrindavan, he rang the bell. This was very unusual. Prabhupada would never ring his bell in the middle of the night unless it was kind of like an emergency situation, because he let the servants rest until 4 or so in the morning. But now it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, Prabhupada's ringing his bell. So he said, go get Guru Kripa. So this is in Vrindavan, so at that time it was in the guest house, so went to the guest house and he was Maharaj. So Prabhupada wants to see him. So of course he's sleeping. Everyone's, you know, for the most part, is sleeping at that time. So he goes in, and, you know, half awake, and offers his obeisances and sit up. And he said, yes, Prabhupada. Prabhupada says, what are you doing? He says, I'm sleeping, Prabhupada. Prabhupada looked at him and he said, why? He said, you know, because it's late at night and you have to, you know, get some rest. And Prabhupada said, why? And Prabhupada said, I'm not sleeping. And he said, Prabhupada, you know, you're a Paramahamsa. He said, well, why aren't you? You know, Prabhupada, what do you say? He said, okay, go take rest. He just sent him back to bed. So Prabhupada just do things and understand. Sometimes, one day in Mayapur after lunch, Prabhupada went take his nap. He would always take a nap after lunch. Lie on his left side, we all know that. You lie on your left side, that's the way it's called LSD. You all know what LSD is, huh? It means left side down, LSD. So that's the proper way to lie, is at the age of digestion after lunchtime. So Prabhupada went, and I was in the room with him, and he sits in the bed, and then he looked at me, and he just said, I hate sleep. He said, whenever I'm going to sleep, I think, now I'm going to waste my time. He said, I hate sleep. He said, it's just a waste of time. He said, I wish I never had to sleep. He said, I don't like it. This is devotee. He's thinking like this, just wants to always do something. And then he would lay down very peacefully and rest. But this is the feeling. You can't be artificial. We all need to rest. Whatever it is we need to take, we take. It's not an artificial thing. But that desire just has so much to do. Imagine Prabhupada would think all he wanted to do, wanted to inundate the whole world with Krishna consciousness. So that requires a lot of activity, and it requires to be awake a lot. So Prabhupada never wanted to rest. He was always somewhere to go, someone to give Krishna consciousness to, someone to infect with Krishna consciousness. So also this morning, made me think, lecture this morning made me think of this one story I wanted to tell. I was very new devotee just for a few days. I'll tell it short. And every morning Prabhupada went on his morning walk. And any number, depending on the temple you were at, there could be 4 devotees or there could be 20 devotees. You see the pictures sometimes. There's so many devotees behind and beside, depending on where you're walking. And they always like to have interaction with Prabhupada. Again, that connection, to be able to actually have him look at you or say something to you, or to exchange, to ask him a question. This is one way that devotees would do. So they would ask Prabhupada a question. And it wasn't even so much that they had questions. It was just that they wanted to ask him a question, so Prabhupada talked to them. Because now this brings your relationship to a whole other level. Prabhupada talked to me, he looked directly into my eye, and he said something. So devotees would invent questions, just so they could ask. They might have answers to them. You're shaking your head. It's not the most wonderful thing because, like Prabhupada said, spiritual mastery is not like your plaything. It's very serious. One has to be grave before their spiritual master as well. And sometimes it didn't always work. Sometimes you would ask a question and Prabhupada would just look at you. He wouldn't answer at all. Or sometimes you would ask a question and it would get you in trouble. Like one devotee asked, Prabhupada, in Christianity they say that, the Bhagavad Gita goes back to 1,500 years, not 5,000 years. Because in Christianity, of course, they like to put everything within the Christian time frame. So if you say Bhagavad Gita, science of God's 5,000 years old, then that puts it much, much further back than Christian religion. So you'll see some writings like this. So one devotee, he asked Prabhupada, he said, so they say, Bhagavad Gita is like that. It's just in 1,500 years, Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, and the Bible's older. And Prabhupada just looked at him, he said, so why do you think like that? So it was like, in just trying to speak to Prabhupada, it became, Prabhupada questioned why do you have such doubts? So he took it as his own doubt, and he asked the question. Otherwise, why are you asking the question, right? If you understand, it's 5,000 years old, there's no need to ask a question like that. But devotees would ask questions just to speak to Prabhupada, and have Prabhupada speak to him. But Prabhupada was not a foolish person. Prabhupada always understood everything. So on this morning walk, I was young, I was just a 20-year-old brahmachari, and there was another brahmachari. He was on the morning walk, and obviously it was the first time he was around Srila Prabhupada, and he never knew again when he would be with Srila Prabhupada. So he was also wanting to ask a question. And you could just see he was, just had that kind of look in the whole walk. But he was afraid, as again, when you were around Prabhupada, unless you were with him for some time, usually you were in anxiety. There was no need to be, but it was an awe, a reverence, and just to be around such a personality. So he never got up the courage to ask his question until the end of the morning walk. The whole walk goes on for an hour. Prabhupada walks around the park, then he comes back to the car, and I open the back door of the car. Prabhupada gets in, and I'm just about to close the door, and the devotee's there. He's standing right there now. He's still, thinking, can I ask? I was thinking, and it's all about the finish. The door closes, and that's it. No more opportunity. So I'm just standing there with the door, and the devotee says, Prabhupada, how do I become Krishna conscious? Which was really an awkward question to ask at such a time. And it's an awkward question anyway, because it's all Prabhupada talks about is how to become Krishna conscious. It's like an open secret, how to become Krishna conscious. But it's all he could think of was how to have that exchange, personal exchange with Srila Prabhupada. So he just kind of blurted it out. And Prabhupada just looked at him, and he said one word. And then, car door was there, so he looked at us, and he said one word to him, right to him. And then he just put his head forward, straight in the car. So he was finished. And then I closed the door. And I went around the other side, I sat down next to Prabhupada, and the car drove off. So Prabhupada told him. Prabhupada was so expert. The whole time, of course, Prabhupada knows. He knew. One thing Prabhupada, they say, I didn't see Prabhupada, I heard things, devotees, when you come in, they say Prabhupada, his feet didn't touch the ground when he was walking in the airport. I never saw those things. But I know Prabhupada always knew what was going on in my mind, because he would say things. And it happened to many, many devotees where, Prabhupada would answer your questions, even though you didn't ask them, he would answer them. So, what was the one word? We heard it many, many times in class today. That was the focus. How do you become Krishna conscious? Desire. So this is your desire. And actually, it's all we ever do. We don't do anything except desire. And this, again, it was the focus on class this morning. It's to understand and to learn how to desire all the time to serve Krishna. And that's devotional service. So I said it's Prabhupada who made that word bhakti, devotional service, rather than just devotion. And it becomes an active, it's devotional service. So it's just by desire. Because we don't do anything else. We're incapable. We're just spirit souls sitting inside these different bodies. And we desire, and Krishna is fulfilling our desire. According to our karma, our desires are filled. According to what we deserve, desires are filled. But it's all about desire. We're always desiring. And we all are here because we all desire to be Krishna conscious. That's why we're in these situations. But we have different levels of desire. And we have that desire, but then there's usually on the other stack in our deck of cards, there's so many other desires we have that we could say aren't pure desires for devotional service. But the devotee, like Prabhupada, he didn't desire anything. Like when I became his servant, he didn't, get one of his leaders at GBCs or his secretary and say, okay, I'm looking for a servant. His last servant's gone, so, make sure the next one is a really good cook and he knows how to massage and that he's not going to be spaced out and he's going to focus on his, and be attentive to his, nothing. Because it was for his personal service, so he had no request because he just wants to serve Krishna. he had nothing else to do except serve Krishna. So whatever Krishna provided him, that was sufficient. I told him when we were in India, it was a struggle in India. It was very austere for a Westerner at that time. Now you can find nice accommodations, things. If you're not willing to pay the rupees, you can live very nicely in India. You can have your air conditioning and your heat in the winter time and hot water and all these things and clean drinking water and so many things. But it was difficult then. And traveling with Prabhupada, also facilities were not always so good for him and certainly not for his entourage. You know, Prabhupada might get a nice room, but we may get something a little different. So this one day we were staying, it was in Bombay, and we were staying at a very wealthy man's house. And he was a Bollywood producer or something. You know? So he had a big, beautiful house, marble, everything. It was like a palace, a castle, in my estimation. So we all had very nice rooms. Prabhupada had a nice room, private bathroom. I had my own room with private. So I was like, you know, I was in heaven. You know, I was just so happy to have facility and nice clean place and marble floors in my own bathroom, and it was a shower thing. And after we got set up, Prabhupada rang the bell. So I went in, offered obeisances, and Prabhupada had a smile. You know. Again, he was amused. Prabhupada sometimes was amused by me. You know, sometimes people can amuse you, like little children. They amuse you with their simplicity, you know, and their obvious behaviors. You know, when they do something. So I went in the room, and so Prabhupada looked at me. He said, "So you like it here?" He knew I liked it. He knew I loved it. You know, never wanted to leave. I didn't want to stay anywhere else in India after being there. And they servants, you know, they ask you, "What do you want to eat?" And it's like, Krishna. So I said, "Yes, Prabhupada, very much." You know? He said, "Yes." He said, "It's a very nice facility." He said, "If Krishna gives you a bed," he pointed to the bed. It was a nice bed, you know. He said, "If Krishna gives you a bed to sleep in, then we sleep in a bed." He said, "But if he doesn't give you a bed," he said, "then we sleep on the floor." He said, "We're not attached." So I was like, "Yes." Not attached, but when it was available, it was more fun to have the bed than if it wasn't to have the bed. But this was Prabhupada's mentality, these things. And you see that in India. You know, people, they can sleep anywhere. You know, it's so different than we have to make an arrangement. Like if you're traveling on the road, you got to find the right, hotel, motel to stay in, and you go to one, this room's horrible. But in India, they don't even need a room. You know, when you go to places like in Vrindavan or going to Mayapur, the pilgrims, they put all their luggage in the center, whatever bags they carry their things in for their pilgrimage. There might be 20 of them together, and they put everything in the center there. Then they all just lie around the outside, just lie on the ground and rest. They can do it any time, day or night. And their sleeping is just as peaceful and happy, maybe better than any of us, because they have no anxieties about anything. They have nothing to lose. I see living in Govardhan, and I see these people come, and it's just so amazing. I live, in a really nice gated community, Western style house. I have all facilities. And there's this wall, it's like 8 foot high. And right on the other side of the wall, people are pumping the water in the morning to take their bath and everything. They certainly, I'm not any happier than them. And like I say, I have more problems, because the more you have, then the more there is to be an anxiety about. But they're just very peaceful. And when they come on pilgrimage, they'll do their dandavats and do the parikrama around Govardhan. And whatever families or groups are together, they cook. They just collect whatever pieces of wood they can gather. They have them little kerosene stoves, and they eat nice, fresh prasadam every day. Wherever they are, they can sit down and roll chapatis, make some kitchen or something, and they're happy, and they're peaceful. And they just want to do some service. You know, they just want to offer their respects to Govardhan. It was very wonderful to see. And I learned so much, you know, by being around these devotees like that. They're just so absorbed. They just do anything to do. So, in leading to your answering your question, we're going to talk about Prabhupada a little bit. And this was a trip Prabhupada made in 1975. As he went around the world in 2 months. It started in India, Bombay, and he traveled east. So he went to Japan, Hawaii, Los Angeles, Mexico City, Caracas, Venezuela. This was a famous trip. He went through South America. He went to Mexico, then he went to Caracas, then he went to Florida, then he went to Atlanta, Georgia, which is just north, and then from there traveled further east. He went to London, Tehran, and then to Mayapur for what would be the biggest festival ever. Over 500 devotees at the Mayapur festival. So now the Lotus building is there, and the wall was there for devotees to stay. So this would be the biggest festival. So Prabhupada was going to all these different places. And he was in a very ecstatic mood. We talk about the internal and the external. So when one is completely detached materially and completely attached to Krishna, they're the same, internal and external. There's no difference. And that's what it says. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says. That's when real bhajan begins. That's when you begin your bhajan. We're all practicing. We're learning how to become detached. You know, up here attached, it says be detached and do your service, and internally always be absorbed in devotional service, trying to make progress. So when all that balances out, then you're doing bhajan, real bhajan. You're always absorbed in Krishna. He says, so that's when it begins, when these things are completely balanced. So that's a process. That's a process that we go through. But Prabhupada, of course, he was doing everything he wanted to do all the time. The external and internal was the same. Internally, he was with Krishna all the time. Externally, he was the same. He was just serving Krishna, loving Krishna, absorbed. And as he was traveling, he was really absorbed. Everywhere he went, he saw Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He saw Lord Nityananda Prabhu on the altars. In every temple, as he would come in, he would always have that greeting. The arrival, he would give an arrival talk. In every place, from Mexico City, Caracas, Miami, he just sat down and he just looked at the deities. And he had tears in his eyes all the time. He was beginning to say how merciful Lord Chaitanya is. In Caracas, he said, he's traveled so far to be with you. So see, this is personalism. Person. You saw Lord Chaitanya, he went a long way, he said, to be with you people here in South America. Prabhupada went a long way. This is also what was going on. It's Prabhupada who brought Lord Chaitanya, brought the holy name to all these places around the world. So now 10 years after Prabhupada arrived in America, he's seen the holy name manifest everywhere. He's seen Lord Chaitanya dancing everywhere around the world. So Prabhupada was in ecstasy. And Prabhupada always kept his, for the most part, his ecstatic symptoms very private. But they were leaking out a little bit, much more than usual. I had seen a few times. And so then he arrived in Atlanta, making this short form. And there, of course, was a very pretty temple. Temple room was about this long, but half as wide. And in the USA, when Prabhupada would come to a temple, there were hundreds of devotees. This temple room was packed, and they were outside the doors, outside the windows. So Prabhupada arrived, and he sat down, and always very happy to be with his disciples. And Prabhupada loved his disciples so much, and loved their enthusiasm. And he saw them all being very pure devotees to serve Krishna. So then he said, he's looking at everyone, he said, we have gone, he said, Los Angeles, he said, to Mexico City. So now he's seeing Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda on the altar, and we've been there. He said, then Miami, he said, and now we're here. And I think your temple is the best. So all the devotees, how do you go? They were all happy, because it was very pretty, and it, like it was done in like Vedic arches. It was very, very pretty at that time. So then Prabhupada was already feeling very ecstatic and choked up, we say, and his speaking, it was becoming difficult. But he just looked, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. Vyasa-san was in the back, so he was looking straight at the deities. And he said, Parama Karuna Ahudvijana. So he started this was when he introduced this song at this time, during the 3 days he was there. So he said, Parama Karuna Ahudvijana. And he translated, he said, the two lords. He said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda Prabhu. He said, they're very kind, very merciful. He said, they don't require any surrender. They're just distributing love of Godhead. He said, Krishna, he's also kind. He said, but he requires that you surrender. He said, but Lord Chaitanya, he's so merciful, he doesn't even require. He said, he's so kind. And then he just started crying. That was it. He couldn't, each word was coming out more difficult for him to say. And then he just broke down and he started to cry. That was the end. It was the shortest lecture he ever gave, the shortest arrival address. And tears were just flooding out of his eyes. And he just would close his eyes. And this was the first time I saw Prabhupada on the Vyasa-san go into ecstasy. I saw it 3 times, all after this time. But this was the first time. And he just closed his eyes, and there was hundreds of devotees packed, and you didn't hear a sound because everyone was just looking at Prabhupada, and everyone would feel ecstasy somehow or other. Just seeing Prabhupada in ecstasy, we would feel some kind of ecstasy. So everyone's just looking, sitting, and then maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, don't know how long. But then finally Prabhupada opened his eyes and he could chant Hare Krishna. And that was it. And he just started kirtan. So then, during the day, well, the next morning, we'll tell this, the next morning, so then that evening, every evening I massaged Prabhupada in his room, in the bedroom. Here they had his own quarters. He had like his own house. It's still there. He only stayed there 3 days. And the whole time he was here. This place is still there, the Prabhupada's quarters, and then there is one of the places to go to see Prabhupada's Tirtha. It's a Prabhupada Tirtha in Atlanta where Prabhupada stayed. So his bedroom was very nice, and like it always was. And when I would give Prabhupada a massage in the evening, I would generally like kneel down on the floor. And Prabhupada would sit up or he would lie down in the bed. And you wouldn't have a big bedroom light on or anything. Whatever light was coming into the room, that's all there was. It was like a quiet time. It was my favorite time to be with Prabhupada because you were alone with him. No one came in. There was no questions of like secretary coming in with a question or letters. That was it. The evening was done. So you were alone with Srila Prabhupada. So I'm massaging his legs, dry, no oil at night. So you just kind of rub and squeeze, squeeze all the muscles, and then you massage the feet. So you move around from one side to the next. So Prabhupada was just lying back and he was sitting up a little bit. And on the wall there was a big painting. So Prabhupada was looking at the painting. And the painting was Krishna Balaram, the cowherd boys, and they're in the forest of Vrindavan with the calves and the cows. So I'm massaging. Always that's, you never just sit there. Even if he's talking to you, you don't just sit. When you're giving a massage, you never stop your service. So I'm squeezing and squeezing. And Prabhupada's sitting back and he goes, I like the cowherd boys very much. So then as soon as he said that, I was like, I became attentive. And this was the second time Prabhupada said that when I was in his presence. First time was before I became a servant in a garden in Los Angeles, when I would read Krishna book to him every day. And at one point he stopped, when I stopped reading, Prabhupada said, I like the cowherd boys very much. So again, he said, I like the cowherd boys very much. And then he started telling a story. And he said, every day, he said, Krishna and Balaram, he said, they would go with their friends, with the cowherd boys, into the forest of Vrindavan. And he said they were young, they were just little boys. He said, so they didn't herd cows. He said they herded the calves. And cows are very big, you can't put little boys with big cows. So he said they herded the calves, many, many calves. He said, and before they would go, he said, mothers would make them all tiffins. He said, so all the cowherd boys, all their mothers, like they still practice the same thing. People go to work, you go to work with your tiffin. You don't eat out in India. Everything's changed. That was the method. So he said, the cowherd boys, their mothers, they would in their tiffin, very simple, simple community. So they would have chapati, dal, rice, like that in the tiffin. He said, Mother Yasoda, she would make for Krishna, you'd have kachuri, muglu. That would be his tiffin, had nice, opulent prasadam. So Prabhupada's just lying back talking. He's talking about, all from looking at this photo, and I'm rubbing, squeezing his toes and pulling the toes, and then he said, they would go and they would play. He said then lunchtime would come, after some hours they would stop, they'd be hungry. He said so sometimes, he said, they would grab Krishna's tiffin, some of the cowherd boys, they'd grab his tiffin and they'd play keep away. They would keep it away from Krishna, tease him, go this way, that way, and he said, and then finally, he said they'd keep Krishna's tiffin. He said, and then they would give Krishna one of their tiffins. He said, so Krishna, he would have the chapatis, rice and dal. He said, in the cowherd boys, they'd have Krishna's tiffin with the kachuri. And Prabhupada was called Kachuri Mukhi, loved kachuri from the time he was a little boy. He said, so they would have Krishna's tiffin with the kachuri and maglu. And then he just said, I just want to go back to the spiritual world and eat kachuri and maglu with Krishna. And then he closed his eyes, and that was the last thing he said, and he just kept massaging. And then finally, at some point, he'd go, okay, take rest. So that was it. But this was Prabhupada's mood. He was just in so much ecstasy. And it was just spilling out. It was like overflowing. It got to a point where somehow it just had to overflow. So that to me, that was one of the most wonderful things that ever happened. The whole time I was listening to hear this story, and to hear Prabhupada express just this desire just to be with Krishna again, eat kachuri and he said to go back. He said, and eat kachuris with Krishna. Imagine. Prabhupada never discussed his form and his group in the spiritual world at different times. Sometimes devotees would ask a few here and there in their private moments. One devotee asked Prabhupada, who you are. He said, we don't discuss these things. This is not our. And another time, the devotee asked, and Prabhupada said, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And another time, the devotee asked, he said, if I told you, you would faint. So these were the only responses that I know of that anyone ever got about Srila Prabhupada's form in the spiritual world. So then Atlanta was cold. It was the very beginning of March, and there was a cold spell there. So we had come from India, Bombay, means hot, Hawaii, hot, Los Angeles, pleasant, Mexico, Caracas were both nice, Miami's hot, coconut trees. Then Atlanta, it was cold. And traveling, if anyone knows, when you travel around a lot, and you don't always have everything you need, especially if you're thinking warm and it becomes cold and you don't have. So this is what happened. We arrived in Atlanta, and the devotees, of course, they gave Prabhupada. They had sweaters in his closet, sweaters, socks. They even got him new shoes, canvas shoes, everything were there. But myself and my godbrothers, we didn't even have a pair of socks. Because we had just come from India for so many months, so socks are not something you think about. Sweaters and all these things. We traveled light. So we went on the morning walk, and it was pretty evident on the morning walk, I guess, to Prabhupada that we were cold. We were struggling along on the morning walk, and all windy, and I have these Indian sandals, chappals on. So Prabhupada gives class, he greets the deities, gives class. And then he rings the bell. So I go in. And it was a small sitting room, and I kind of sat beside him. He said, he said, do you need socks? And it's always when Prabhupada would ask if you need anything, your first instinct, even though you wanted to say yes, I need everything, you would say no, because it was your spiritual message. So I say, he said, do you have socks? And I said, well, no, Prabhupada. He said, go to the closet. And so I went to the closet, and Prabhupada has all these, socks, everything's, and saffron, there's saffron socks, orange saffron like that. So he said, take some socks. So of course, immediately he said, I can't do that, Prabhupada. I said, you're my spiritual master. I said, to your socks. I said, I can't, wear your socks. And then he said, if I say you can do it, you can do it. He said, so go get socks. So then I'm like, okay, And he said, the others, meaning the secretary in Sanskrit, do they have socks? And I said, no, Prabhupada. He said, well, get socks so that you all have socks. He said, it's cold. I said, yes, Prabhupada. So I was very happy now, thinking, Prabhupada socks. So that means, that's like putting on Superman's outfit. Just by wearing them, you're going to become super devotee, by wearing Prabhupada's transcendental paraphernalia. And his socks in particular, because they were on his lotus feet. And that's why he didn't want to, couldn't wear them, because they were on Prabhupada's lotus feet. How can you put them on your feet? But he said, I say it's okay, you can do it. So then that's the exception to the rule, which we all love exceptions to rules, don't we? I do. I love being the exception whenever I could. That's my disease. So now I'm sitting there and I have all these socks, these woolly socks. I'm already feeling warm, by Prabhupada's mercy. So then he looks at me. He said, do you need shoes? And and I just thought, no, this can't, you know. And I said, Prabhupada, I said, you know, I can't wear your shoes. You know, and again, he just said, if I say you can do it, you can do it. And then he elaborated. He said, when the spiritual master is present, he said, you can use, if he gives you something, it's prasadam, he said, you can use it. He said, then when he leaves, he said, that becomes worshipable. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, so, they gave me these shoes. He said, like he wore them on the walk in the morning. He said, but they don't fit right. He said, you can take them. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. So then I'm thinking, Prabhupada's shoes, you know, just to have Prabhupada's shoes. They've given away many pairs of Prabhupada's slippers, sandals, shoes, but I never had Prabhupada personally give me a pair. So I thought, yeah, see, I'll take them, and I took them. So then he said, all right. So then I offered obeisances, and I walked out. It was like, you know, being raised a Christian, you know, it was like Christmas Day, you know, I had a big stack of presents from Prabhupada, and I was like happy, you know. So I walked into the servant quarters, and I'm already knowing, you know, what's going to happen, because we were all, you know, we were just a few of us, and we were together all the time. So you know what it's like when you're, you know, with your family members. You know how everybody reacts to everything, what's going to happen. You do something, you say something. So I go in, and I've got this stack of socks, you know, and these shoes. And I go in, and they're just looking at me. And I said, look what Prabhupada gave me, you know, gave me his socks, you know, and immediately the Sanskrit editor, he goes, you know, you can't use them. You know, he said, they're Prabhupada's. You know, you can't wear his socks, you know. And I said, okay. I said, well, I said, some of them are for you too. And I said, oh, okay. Well, because it's spread out to everyone, it became all right, you know, and an exception was acceptable. I said, you know, they're for all of us. Okay. I said, so then we're all sitting there like a bunch of little 5-year-olds, you know, putting on Prabhupada. Feeling completely like, you know, wonderful. And then, of course, I said, you know, look what he gave me to use, you know. You can't. And then Prabhupada said, you know, so I told him the whole thing. Prabhupada said it was all right. You know, if he says it's all right, it's all right. So imagine Prabhupada make anything all right. So of course I sat down there on the floor and I tried to squeeze my, it was too small for Prabhupada's foot, which of course he had a foot which was smaller than mine, so obviously mine wasn't going to fit in, but I really tried. And I would have worn them if it just fit in there just because they were Prabhupada's shoes, because what could happen to you wrong if you're wearing Prabhupada's shoes? You know, every step you take would have been, you know, kept you safe. It didn't fit. So then later on I went down, I saw the temple president, and I gave them to him. I said, I said, these were Prabhupada's shoes, but they didn't fit, so you can, you know, use them in the temple. So that's what happened with those. But this was Prabhupada. This is what, imagine to be with a person like that. You know, here you are, you're trying your best, you know, you just want to serve him, and Prabhupada's giving you all this mercy all the time. He reciprocated in such a sweet, wonderful way. And he had, you know, Prabhupada knew, I mean, when he was doing this, how comedic, you know, how funny the whole situation was, because he knew all of us, what we were like. And this was 75, so we were all young. When I became Prabhupada's servant, I was with Prajuna and Shyama Sundar, who were both 10 years older than I was. So now I'm with Paramahamsa and Nitai, and we're all, at that time, we're all like 24, so we were all young. We were all kind of much kind of different class. And me and Paramahamsa in particular were both rather casual, and Prabhupada was easygoing. We had this very, and somehow or other we were all traveling with Prabhupada, you know, doing this service. So then from there, Prabhupada went to London, and he went in ecstasy, and speaking in the middle of class, not after 2 minutes, but after 20 minutes or so, he just went into ecstasy. And the same thing, everybody would just stop. And he opened his eyes and says, Chant Hare Krishna. Then he went to Mayapur, and at the arrival address. Now he's in Mayapur, Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, and the place where we now have this temple, biggest temple in the world, going up to Mayapur. So again, he's giving class, he's talking about the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and he goes and he went into ecstasy. And he closes. Now there's hundreds of devotees, 500 devotees in the temple room, all his Western disciples. And his eyes closed. So after a minute or two, someone behind the Vyasa-san starts chanting pranam mantras. Namo! And Prabhupada, eyes open, and kirtan started. So after kirtan, Prabhupada goes up to his room, and amongst the devotees who were outside, and the secretary and I, there's a big discussion. Prabhupada was in ecstasy, and the devotees started kirtan. And we were all, 99% of everybody else was all just quiet, because we didn't want to disturb Prabhupada. So it became a discussion whether that was the proper thing to do or not. So no one knew. You won't find the answers in Prabhupada's books to that question. What to do when your spiritual master goes into ecstasy on the Vyasa-san. So it came up to Brahmananda, who was the secretary. He said, well, I'll go ask Prabhupada. And I'm like, oh, Krishna. So we both go in a room together, offer obeisances, and Prabhupada, it was after breakfast, Prabhupada's sitting behind his desk, and he looks at us, and he's like, yes. And I didn't say anything. Brahmananda's trying to think how to ask this question, awkward question, and he said, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, you know how today, he said in class, during class, he went into ecstasy, and he said, what should we do? And Prabhupada looked at him, what kind of a question? And he said, his answer was, I don't do that very often. That was his response, why are you asking me this silly question? He said, I don't do that very often. It was a very humble, kind of shy response. He was embarrassed almost, it was being asked. And of course, Brahmana said, yes, Prabhupada, but when you do it, what should we do? Should we just sit there quietly, look at you, or should we start a kirtan? And Prabhupada just looked, he said, just chant Hare Krishna. Which is what he said to everything when you asked him, was just chant Hare Krishna. That was basically the answer to every question we had. Just chant Hare Krishna. Because ultimately, that's our goal, is just always chant, be with Krishna, chant Hare Krishna. You fill yourself with Krishna. He said, just chant Hare Krishna. So then, Prabhupada said, all right, left the room. I'm sure Prabhupada was thinking, my disciples, what a bunch of, characters. But that was in that course of a few weeks, 3 times Prabhupada went into ecstasy on the Vyasa-san. And it was just like I say, it was Lord Chaitanya, inundation of love of God, and he was overwhelmed by the fact that Lord Chaitanya's prediction was fulfilled, and that chanting of Hare Krishna was going on all over the world. And Prabhupada knew he was the person who did it. He was aware of that. So then we stayed in Mayapur for some time. So one day, this sannyasi goes into Prabhupada's room, and he wanted Prabhupada's chadar, prasadam. We all wanted Prabhupada's prasadam, and food prasadam, clothing prasadam, whatever, shoes, bead bags, Brahmin dress, hair. It was all Prabhupada's prasadam. So he decided he wanted Prabhupada's gray chadar. Now Prabhupada, I came with Prabhupada in 72. Now he was already using this chadar. So this now is May of 1975, now March of 1975. And I see pictures, puts the chadar back at least a few more years. I think probably the first chadar Prabhupada had, we see in those early photos he showed yesterday, he was wearing that black and white coat, and also he didn't have wool chadar for when it was cold. So this was his first chadar that he probably picked up in 1970 in India. And this devotee wanted it, so he made a plan, and he bought a chadar. So he brought a much more expensive chadar. It was hand embroidered, and it was made with, it was above cashmere. It's called, it only comes from the chin hairs of the Himalayan mountain goat. And it's known for being so fine. Yeah, yeah. The best. Not what they call pashmina nowadays, which, they call everything pashmina. But this was pure pashmina. And it's known for, like, you can put the chadar in like that and pull it, and the whole chadar will fit through your ring. It's so fine, and yet it's so warm. Imagine the goats in the Himalayas, this is what their hairs are from. So it's very, very warm. So anyway, these chadars were available then. They were very expensive. Now they're very, very expensive. And he gets one. And it's embroidered both sides. Makes it more and more expensive. So he comes into the room, puts it down. Prabhupada, I have this chadar for you. And of course, he's thinking, I'm going to get Prabhupada's other chadar, because he didn't need two. Which was a good assumption. So Prabhupada picks it up and he looks at it. And the devotee's telling him it's this and this. And Prabhupada said, oh yes. He said, when I was a young boy, he said, every year I would get a chadar like this. And, well, like, Prabhupada's father was, what was he? He was a cloth merchant. So he said, my father, his good friend, he dealt in these. This was his business. He dealt with these pashmina chadars all the time. He said, so I would get them when I was young, So it completely, like, took what was very, very special and made it not very significant. And Prabhupada took it, and he had a shelf behind him, and he just took it, picked it up, and threw it on the shelf, because it's like it was a chadar, not anything. So the devotee, of course, realized he had no bargaining power with Prabhupada after what had happened. And I was sitting there, and I thought, I developed, see, this is why association is important, because right then, there was like a desire seed that started to grow in my heart, and I thought, I want Prabhupada's chadar. I never thought like that. The whole time I was with Prabhupada, I never thought I wanted something that he had, except for the Rolex watch. I knew there was no question I was going to get a Rolex watch from him. So, that didn't grow, that seed. But this seed started to grow. I want Prabhupada's chadar. And I made a plan, a really good plan. And I had to wait to execute it. It was going to take another month or two before I could do it. Imagine the patience I had. So I had to wait till we got to Vrindavan, because Mayapur was, there was nothing there in Mayapur, but Vrindavan was a place, it was a city, and, that's where you got all your devotee paraphernalia and things, torches, dhotis, chadars, whatever you wanted, you could get Lohi Bazaar, or if not, you got in Delhi. So, this is when they had the opening, Krishna Balaram Mandir, 1975, so that was in April. So it was over a month had gone by. So we get there, and finally when we're there, because I knew devotees there, and I knew the Matajis, I had many friends there, and at that time I was Grahasta, so I had some rupees I had a few dollars somehow or other in my pocket, some rupees, and I was good friends with Jamuna and Palika. They were always cooking for Prabhupada. And Palika would do the shopping. So when we get to Vrindavan, after everything settles down, I go up to Palika and I said, Palika, I said, I need a chadar. And I told her, I wanted a chadar. I said, gray, wool, chadar. And it has to be Lohi brand. This is what Prabhupada's chadar was, Lohi chadar. I saw it every day. I held it, gave it to put it around them, folded it, put it on the shelf. For 2.5 years I did this. So I said, I want this. I said, how much would it cost? And I don't know, at that time maybe it was $15 or something, And so she said, okay, next time I go to town, I can get it. So she went and got it, and it was pretty. It was nothing special. It was just a very average, inexpensive wool chadar. And she gave it to me. So that very day, Prabhupada has his lunch, and he takes his nap, and then he gets up. So after Prabhupada was in his sitting room, I took the chadar, I got it in my arm, and I go into Prabhupada's room, and I offer obeisances, and I sit up. So he looks at me, because usually you don't go in unless he calls you, but he's like looking at me, he's going, yes. So I was, very silly, foolish. And I said, Prabhupada, and I said, I just bought this chadar for myself. He said, good. He said, it's cold, you need a chadar, And I said, yes. I said, but it's new, and I'm thinking that I should give it to you because you're my spiritual master. And he goes, I have the chadar. In Vrindavan, he had a shelf behind him right there, right in his sitting place, and on the shelf is folded his chadar. So he said, I have the chadar. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. But I'm thinking, you should have the new chadar because it's new and the chadar is old. And, I'm so obvious. But I didn't realize, how obvious I was. So Prabhupada, he's just playing with me. And he goes, no. He said, you keep your chadar. He said, I have a chadar, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with the chadar. So I'm going, I said, that's the 3 times. I always tell you 3 times, right? Everything you do it, you have to go through this procedure. Otherwise, it just goes on. So then I just looked at him. I said, Prabhupada, I would much rather have your chadar and you take this chadar. And he just looked at me and smiled. He said, okay. It was a very simple exchange. But it is also, I think there's always a lesson. And the lesson I always learned from Prabhupada was you have to be honest. If you weren't honest with him, you weren't going to get anywhere because he could see right through, your facade. And he always just wanted to see that you were honest, especially in relationship, personal relationship with him. You had to have this quality, Like he said, it's not good to try to trick the spiritual master. You can't try to trick your spiritual master. You can't make advancements trying to trick your spiritual master. So, anyway, he was happy to give me the chadar. He was, he got a new chadar, and I got, and he said, okay, you can have it. So, anyway, over the years, there were many things I collected from Srila Prabhupada. Most everything I gave away at the time. So many things, so many stories, so many sweaters, blankets, quilts, Brahmin threads, hairs, shoes, sandals, wooden sandals, your Vrindavan, Babaji sandals, everything. But this chadar, and I still have a few other items that here or there, but this chadar I kept. So it stays with me now. I finally got it back into where it stays, and I keep it in Govardhan. We are in Govardhan. It's on the altar. Sometimes I bring it out and put it on the altar because there's worshipable. It's just like having your Shalagram Shilas or your Govardhan Shilas. This was Prabhupada's chadar, which he wore for over 5 years, probably went around the world with him 10 times. It went always with him. He always had this chadar with him. So anyway, I brought this chadar. So today, I thought I'd give you Prabhupada's special benediction, and you can all come up and you can get a little mercy from Prabhupada's chadar. Put your hand in this chadar or whatever. And that's what's in this bag. This is Prabhupada's chadar. And that's the sticker that says Lohi. For Lohi brand chadar, because I just wanted the exact same one. So I don't, you know, it's old. It's over 40 years, so it's very kind of. But this is it. So I thought today we would end the class. You could all just see Prabhupada's chadar and take blessings from Prabhupada's paraphernalia. So tomorrow we'll have another class and we will tell some other interesting stories, some very nice personal things, but this is what I worked very hard to get and to keep time. It's got a little lamb over here, shows that it's pure wool. That's a big thing. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Also, I did brought books to go to the USA with me, and most all of you who did, I was here last year, so got books, but if any of you want a book, I do have a few copies. I'll be happy to share with you. So we can do that tomorrow. I leave Monday morning, right at Mangalartik. I'll be leaving the temple. I'll come and take darshan of the deities and head right out at 4:30 because I have a 7:20 flight on Monday. So tomorrow I'll be here for the program, for our class here, and then very, very early Monday go. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. It really is. We go to Vrindavan, first in the Prabhupada's room where there's so many things are there. And, these things become worshipable for a reason, because they carry Prabhupada's presence with them. So there's nothing ordinary. And it was one of the very first things I learned to do was fold Prabhupada's chadar on a morning walk. And it was in Dallas, and there's a picture of it. And it was probably the first morning walk I went on him with as a servant. And the sun came up, so it got, it started to get warm. And Prabhupada took his chadar off and he handed it to me. And I didn't even know what to do with it because it was just, it was just this long piece of cloth. So I started fumbling. And then Prabhupada, he grabbed it back and he showed me how to fold. It was very simple, put it in half and quarters and eighths. But he did it without any, he didn't get angry or anything, but he had to show me every little thing. He had to just show me each little thing. So this is that chadar too, and there's a picture of him folding the chadar. So when I just saw it for the first time just a few months ago, and I got very excited. I saw it on Facebook. I'm not promoting anything, but that's where I saw it, was on Facebook. Any other men? Everybody's okay? So maybe you can come. Yeah. So that the ladies are all comfortable, you can give it to you, and then you can hold it for all the other ladies. Well, but I'll let you. Okay. You can put it here. So you can, so that they can all. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But, Jai Prabhupada. So you can be shy or you can be greedy for it. You have a choice. Sometimes shyness will get you nowhere.
Just humbleness.
If we could give you blessing with this charter, you're all going to start traveling around the world, spreading Krishna consciousness. This is what we want to do. We want to become empowered to try to help others become Krishna conscious. Everybody okay? Did you go? Yes, you? So if nothing else you got from all these days, you got Prabhupada's mercy today. If you didn't hear anything, so I figured that's why I thought I would drink. If I didn't do anything else, I gave you Prabhupada's mercy. Any questions? Okay. Here, you can put this away. Yes.
During the first class, we were talking about routine. And I realized that when there is a routine, there is a tendency to get into this autopilot mode,
Like automatic pilot.
Yes, and not to be so conscious or present. So I wanted to ask how to have this both.
That's a good question, yeah. Well, that's, of course, like part of the routine or the books and the classes, although class is the same every day. Again, it's based on desire. We really have to have the desire to not have things become like that, so we're unconscious and not realizing what we're doing. We're bowing down and offering obeisances and everything we can do, chanting the holy name. It all comes to the same thing. We're being inattentive, which is considered the most serious offenses. Would be inattentive while chanting. Those would be inattentive while doing anything. So we have to practice all the time. And I find myself, we all do these things, but I find, again, that's why I like Prabhupada's videos for myself, being with Prabhupada, because you can see our process to become Krishna conscious of Krishna. So that means in everything. So that is the sum and substance of what we're doing, is to learn how to not be impersonalist, to learn how to see everything personal. So we just have to keep, Prabhupada's spiritual master, he would quote him as saying, every morning you should beat your head with your shoes, and every evening you should beat your head with a broom. So we have to always, in one sense Prabhupada said about chanting, there's no question of mind, but there's conquering that mind, so that instead of it wandering all over, you fix it, the lotus feet of Krishna. That's what it's all about, learning how to do that, is realize everything we do is to increase our attachment to Krishna. So to do that we need to learn about Krishna too. How can you become attached to someone you don't know anything about? So again, this is what Prabhupada was doing, was Krishna book, all these, the Bhagavatam, all these things, so we know how wonderful Krishna is, so we can become attached. Just like your mother has a child, the beginning, it's natural, you've already carried it. Comes out, you're already attached because it's part of you. Child is part of you. But then as time goes by, you become more and more attached because of all the wonderful little things it does, all the little faces it makes, and the way it moves, and the first words that come out. All these things increase. So we have to, develop this attachment to Krishna by understanding all these same things through the process of chanting. And always, ultimately, it's all up to the spiritual master, getting mercy from the spiritual master. And that comes through sincere service. So we just keep doing our service no matter what, and we keep bringing our minds back again and again. Unfortunately, the routine, it has, when she used that word this morning, and I heard it, discussed in class, you can, like everything, you can have a positive sense or a negative sense, because when you say, Prabhupada used to use it in a very positive way, that we need to do the routine process of Krishna consciousness, but then you can easily turn it around and say, I'm just doing this routine, it's a routine, and I can do it without thinking. So that's the disease we have to fight, is I'm not just doing it for the sake of doing it. That's not, and again, that's one of the, that Shamrita mentioned, to follow the rules and regulations. Some people are attached to that. They like rules and regulations. They become attached to the rules and regulations. Well, we have to become attached to Krishna, and we follow those rules and regulations to increase our attachment to Him. So we have to pray all the time for that. I can tell you, like personally, when speaking for me, in one sense, maybe you all think it's very easy and natural, and I have attachment to Prabhupada, and to some degree, all these things are true because of the devotees' draw and all out of me. But every day when I come in and I offer obeisances and deities, all I do is pray to give me something to say, so that I can speak, because we have to realize I can't do anything myself. So you have to pray that you're able to develop this attachment. We can't do it on our own. We can only do it by the mercy of the pure devotee. Everything is dependent on mercy. Otherwise, we're all in the same situation. We can chant, night and day, and we can do so many things and be at Mangalartik every morning and attend every class, but without begging for that mercy from the pure devotee, we'll get nowhere. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Yes?
Yes, Prabhu. You mentioned about these different things that Prabhupada used to give you, and his various types of shoes.
Yes.
So I had one question: did he ever wear this kind of shoes with this one peg, the car?
He had them. Well, actually, his bathroom in Vrindavan, they didn't have the one peg. They just had a little canvas thing over the top, and they were his bathroom shoes in Vrindavan. That's why I mentioned the wooden shoes. While I was with him, he never wore the shoes with the one peg in them. He always he had sandals, crisscross X pattern, would slip his feet into, and he had his canvas shoes, sneakers that were always, we wore on a morning walk and things. And in his room, we would also have slippers, different places, especially like in Vrindavan and things. You always have the marble floors and concrete floors. You would always, when you would walk, you would hear those, the slippers walking along the ground. Yes?
Prabhu, I would have a kind of related question to the autopilot mode of doing service. So, related in the sense that when I'm reading Prabhu's books, then that sort of mentality, I know this easily, comes that, oh, I've read this before, and not only that, but there's kind of an element of repetition even in the purpose, that he's saying same thing over and over again. Theoretically, I can understand that, well, I need to hear this, but still, like, do you have any tip how to overcome that sort of initial impression that
Yes, Prabhupada's message, we do hear so much, you can hear him repeat things as you say. I know for me, it's just knowing that I need to hear these things over and over again that make it worthwhile for me. Because if I go into anything else, it doesn't. Until you realize it, which means you're applying it, you need to hear it over and over again, before you can really move on. That was a point Prabhupada made. He said, like, to come and speak. He said there's so many things to speak about us, not being a body, being pure spirit, soul, and servant of Krishna. Until we're acting on that platform, we have to look realistically and saying, I've read this, all right, I'm spirit, soul, and servant of Krishna, but am I engaged 24 hours in serving Krishna? So if you're not, then you need to hear that again, because it's not like you've digested it and are doing it. We're still trying to fulfill so many material desires. So we have to hear these words, understand, coming from the pure devotee, understand Krishna's in every word, and it'll help purify us and bring us to the point of realization of what we're reading, not just theoretical. I read about, I heard so many lectures while I was with Prabhupada, so many things, all for so many years about dying. And then, a few years ago, my wife died. And I realized, I had no realization about it. And, we both had to go through a very intense process. It was, especially the last 6 months, she had cancer, that there was a lot of realizations, we both had. And Krishna was very kind and was able to give her different revelations even, and the ability to become detached from family members in a way that was necessary. Because these are all the things that bring you back into another body, are attachments, material attachments. So we have to learn, we have to become completely detached by becoming attached to Krishna. So if one is sincere, that's what I got to see, was actually Krishna makes so many arrangements for it to happen. And sometimes they may not be what we consider pretty. Like she was saying about this girl who was paraplegic. That, on the material surface, they may not seem like they're very nice, they're very harsh. My wife, she had very painful lymphatic cancer. Her hip was disintegrating, started breaking up. The last month it was just very difficult.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Like that, But I saw how it worked, how Krishna worked everything, and she was able to leave her body, and everything got worked out. She got darshan of Srila Prabhupada at one point. She got darshan of Lord Nityananda, Lord Chaitanya. We saw a little blue boy. She always the most wonderful things. I told the class, I made it a class, it became a class, but just an expression of what happened. And I told it in many, many places because it actually really instills a lot of faith in us. The process works. If you just, if you just work it, it works. You have to have faith. And it's by seeing these practical applications of Prabhupada's disciples as they leave, how Prabhupada takes care of them, and Krishna takes care of them. And they're able to arrive, even under difficult situations, arrive at the place to leave in a Krishna conscious fashion and go back home, back to God, or go wherever Prabhupada's taking them. But these are important things to see. These are practical parts of what you're reading that you need to understand it can happen. So reading, like Prabhupada says, it's very nice to read. He said, but we have to practice what we're reading. He said, otherwise, the result, we won't get the result. So, it's very good to be on a scholarly platform and read a lot, but then we have to apply this philosophy in our lives, which means to try to serve Krishna and become conscious. It's all about becoming conscious. Our nature is, we're very impersonal. Even, amongst everything we do, we have this tendency, because it requires energy, to think like that. It requires energy to think Krishna is making all arrangements. But more and more as time goes by, I see Krishna making arrangements. you know, and never more profound was it than with my wife, seeing how everything was arranged. And since then I see, you know, other things, you know, my living in Govardhan, you know, being there for 16 months, and I had no idea, and I wound up there, and I think it's Krishna, everything's Krishna. And everything is Krishna, and if you think it isn't, then that's what we have to correct. We have to come to the point where we understand everything that's going on is happening with the sanction of Krishna. Otherwise, what are we doing? Desire. So we have to take and purify our desires so that the proper results come. Like she was saying in class, you know, Krishna can fulfill your desires, but he's not going to fulfill the desires of the devotee that brings about his own downfall, more material desires. It was Prabhupada was saying, you know, for so many devotees we say, you know, in a joking manner, you know, Krishna takes away everything. That's then a special favor on you. I mean, you find you don't have anything left, have nowhere to go but to Krishna. Sometimes that's a very scary thing, you know, to arrive at that place. But that is a special mercy. Prabhupada said in a class one day, Prabhupada said, you know, Prabhupada had a big business. He said he could have been a very big millionaire. He said Krishna took everything. And it was in Los Angeles, and the devotees, they started to laugh. And Prabhupada said, no. He said, it's not funny. Sometimes Prabhupada would say things and devotees would laugh, and Prabhupada would say, it's not something to laugh about. It was very serious, it was very grave. So that's certain things, you know. Like I said, I always appreciated Prabhupada's humor, but it's not always about funny. Some things are serious. So Prabhupada was being very serious. He said it was very difficult. You know, he was expressing in a very humble way how upsetting it could be. So we all go through these things sometimes too, where it seems like everything's just, you know, you think everything's all right, and then in a minute you realize everything's gone. And then we have to take shelter of Krishna. And that's what he's always giving us chances, and it can happen again and again and again until we start to get it. We definitely need to stop here. I'm not sure what's going next, but tomorrow, or maybe tomorrow, if you have any questions or anything you want to ask, maybe you should write them down or something, and we can do that. You know, a good part of the class or something. And if there isn't, then do something else. But if anyone has any thoughts or questions they want to ask, we can do that tomorrow at this time, okay? So thank you again very much. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.